on the Supreme Court.
And finally, of Honduran politics, and you know it. The Liberal Party, has different.
Now you're ahead by one for interrupting. So,
Lanny Davis, let me ask you another question. I wanted to follow up on whether you've gotten a chance.
I just wanted one other sentence, which is the Honduran Congress, elected by constituents all over the country. All over the country, from poor to wealthy, have congressional districts. The Honduran Congress overwhelmingly found Mr. Zelaya violated the law. The professor doesn't even concede that point. It's remarkable.
I concede that the Honduran Congress had that vote. I contest your numbers.
Are they corrupt? Are they elite?
Yes. If you know anything about Central American politics, can I finish? If you know anything about Central American politics,
a democratically elected Congress is elite. Now I make my case that that's an ideological statement, not a factual statement.
It's not an ideological statement.
How many people voted for those members of Congress?
The UN and NGOs like Washington Office on Latin America call Central American states, particularly Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, what they call captive states. Basically, political institutions, judiciary, the Congress, controlled by not only traditional families, but basically organized crime cartels. It's called captive states or clandestine powers. It's a fact. And anybody who knows the slightest bit of Central American history, has spent any time in the region, knows that political institutions in Central America, particularly...
Lanny Davis, you said you wouldn't interrupt. Go ahead.
I said I was one behind.
Grandin.
I had one more chance.
You did, and you got it, Professor Grandin.
Go ahead,
Mr. Political institutions, and particularly in these three countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, have been hollowed out from the inside through organized crime cartels, often with deep roots in the military or traditional families. Political parties are often expressions of these interests. Read, for instance, the Washington Office on Latin America, kind of center-left think tank in Washington. They just released a report called Captive States. That looks at Central America. The United Nations has set up a commission to investigate what they call clandestine powers that control Central American politics. This is not a conspiracy theory, and it's certainly not ideological. It's just fact. Anybody who has the slightest knowledge of Central America beyond what they're paid to know about Central America would know this as a fact.
Lanny Davis, I want to follow up my question about meeting with President Obama, which you said you did not have a chance to do that. But you're a longtime law school chum of Hillary Clinton, as well as Bill Clinton. You, of course, were his special counsel. Have you had a chance to speak with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton about this issue?
No, I not only haven't, I deliberately chose not to call the State Department at all as part of my job. My job, I thought and still think, is to get the facts out, to be as honest as I can about my observation of the facts, and to testify, as you may know, before Representative Engel's subcommittee about this situation. And I would really also have to say that if an American liberal, I assume that Professor and I are both liberals, were to make these kinds of judgments about a democracy, the turnout in Honduran, it's one of the great democracies in Latin America in terms of participation and votes, and that kind of laughter and judgmental elitism, which is a word that you seem to like to throw around. I haven't once heard you mention Venezuela and Hugo Chavez and whether you consider him to be a small d Democrat, or is there any corruption in Venezuela? Would you concede there is similar corruption?
This is a discussion about Honduras, and I want to stick with this. I want to know
the answer to the question why Venezuela hasn't been
I want to not go into a debate about Venezuela right now. I want to stick with President Zelaya.
Venezuela, and Amy, you don't want to talk about Venezuela. That's
because I want to stick with this issue of President Zelaya, and I want to turn to his words. We had a chance to first interview him earlier this month during his brief visit to Washington, D.C. This is what he said when Juan Gonzalez and I asked him whether he was illegally trying to extend his term through the referendum and subvert the Constitution of 1982. This is President Zelaya.
In Honduras, we do not have re-elections, and I never intended to be re-elected. That will be a matter for another government, another constitution, and another constituent assembly.
La consulta popular es una encuesta como las que hace decir.
The popular consultation is a survey, just like the one Gallup does or other polling groups. It does not create rights. It has no power to impose. It is not obligatory. It's an opinion poll. How could this be a motive for a coup d'etat? No one has tried me. I was just expelled by force by the military. This is an argument made up by the coup plotters. Don't believe them.
That was the ousted President Zelaya. I'm going to give you each a last comment. Lanny Davis, let's begin with you.
Could I comment about your being the moderator of the show, Amy? No, I guess you don't want me to.
I'd like to give you final comment on this.
So Venezuela has nothing to do with Zelaya, even though when he went into the barracks of the Air Force, he was seizing ballots, which he calls a public opinion survey. He could have hired Gallup to seize ballots sent in by Venezuela. He's arguing with his own Supreme Court, 15-0. And your leading question, Amy, to the professor, well, would you comment on the Supreme Court? Well, let's comment on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is 15-0, already answered Mr. Zelaya's question. The rule of law was that he was ordered to stop because he was in violation of the Constitution, 15-0, 8 of whom were from his own party. You always seem to forget mentioning 8 of those justices were fellow liberals, and a majority of the liberal congressmen elected from poor districts as well as wealthy voted to remove him from office. Amy, you always forget to mention those facts, and the ballots came from Venezuela, from Chavez, but you said we're here to talk about Zelaya, not Venezuela, which is you're literally in denial about the involvement of Venezuela and Ortega behind Zelaya.
Historian Greg Grandin, your final comment.
Well, I think what you see here is exactly a strategy that Davis is borrowing from the Latin American right to cast anybody that they don't like in terms of Venezuela, to taint them with Venezuela. And we're also seeing the importation of that strategy into the United States. The Republicans have done it quite successfully to derail Obama's. I mean, Obama came to office promising to enact a new multilateral policy in Latin America, and his attempt to do this and to call the coup what it is, a coup in Honduras, has largely been sidetracked by Republican pressure, which has said that to support Zelaya, the restitution of Zelaya, as the legitimate leader of Honduras under whatever conditions that the two sides agree on, would be the absolute would be supporting Chavez's agenda in Latin America. So we're seeing both Republicans and Lanny Davis importing this strategy, which has had actually a quite pernicious effect in Latin America. It's basically red baiting.
I want to thank you both for being with us. Greg Grandin, professor of Latin American history at New York University, and Lanny Davis, speaking to us from Washington, D.C., representing the Honduran business leaders. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We'll be back in a minute.